Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some of the different portal news, some of the coaching carousel stuff, a little bit of NFL draft stuff just for fun, but a lot of different stuff happening right now in the world of the portal and coaching carousel. We will keep you updated with all of it as it does, but let's get to a little bit of a whip around. I want to talk about some of the teams that were a little bit overshadowed this year. We're a little bit under talked about. Ole Miss is not necessarily one of them, but wanted to talk about the Egg Bowl before we got out of here because this was a very, very interesting game. It was one of those that the Rebels were able to get a win, were able to get a relatively comfortable win, but Mississippi State was up 14-10 at halftime, and you were looking up thinking, there's no way Ole Miss is going to lose this game and fall fully out of the CFP race. But they finally found a way to get it done. Ole Miss kind of pulled away with an 89-yard touchdown from Ulysses Bentley and never really looked back. I think a lot of remarkable things about this Ole Miss team. Obviously, came up a little bit short of their goals this year, but Jackson Dart set about 1 million school records for Ole Miss this year, breaking a lot of Eli Manning's numbers. Really remarkable player, and obviously leaves school as one of the most impactful and best quarterbacks in Ole Miss history. Really remarkable stuff, and although you didn't necessarily get the ultimate goal this year, a really successful season for Ole Miss. For Mississippi State, I think is a huge offseason. I think that's going to be one of the teams that you see be very active in the portal and very active all over the place. Definitely a team that I'm watching going into 2025. I don't necessarily think they're going to scale into an SEC contender. Could scale into a very interesting team, and definitely one where if you have Michael Van Buren and Kevin Coleman on that team, a lot of special things could happen on that offensive side of the ball. Then you got Illinois. They were able to finish their season 9-3 with only losses to Oregon, Penn State, and Minnesota. Really remarkable stuff from Brett Bielema and company. I mean, they were one of those teams that coming into the year you didn't really know what to expect from. Luke Altmaier coming back, but didn't play all that great of football last year. He played great football this year, but in this game, it was Aiden Lottery. He absolutely dominated the day, had 12 carries, 172 yards, and 3 scores. Pat Bryant was a problem on the outside again. He's just that guy on the outside, and Illinois was one of those slightly overshadowed stories. With Indiana in the Big Ten, they stole a lot of the spotlight, but it was really remarkable to watch what Illinois is and really elite coaching happening over there. Definitely a team that I think can build into something special next year. Obviously going to have to hit on a quarterback with Luke Altmaier walking out the door, but a lot of really good talent there, and definitely a team that and a program that I'm going to be watching going into 2025. Louisville, Kentucky was a little bit of a beatdown. It got really ugly for Kentucky, and another disappointing year for Kentucky. They finished 4-8 after a lot of energy going into this one. A really, really stout defense, a defense that gave them the chance to win a lot of the big-time games that they played. They couldn't quite get it done. Louisville, on the other hand, they got dudes at running back, especially for 2025. Isaac Brown almost went for 200 yards and 2 scores in this game. Duke Watson went for 100 yards and 2 scores in this game. Those two guys are both freshmen. They're going to be absolute problems, and I think this Louisville offense, I also saw Miller Moss was looking at Louisville. If that's the offense that they have going into next year, that's a team that can compete for an ACC title, possibly get into the playoffs. So definitely going to be a really fun team to watch for Kentucky. Just got to try. I just got to try to rebuild it, see what happens in the portal. I do think Cutter Boley is going to be a fantastic quarterback, so maybe you have that position handled at least before you get into the portal, but definitely a lot of things that are going to happen with a ton of guys walking out the door in Lexington, especially on the defensive side of the ball. Duke was able to finish their year 9-3 very, very quietly with SMU and all those other teams in Pitt and a couple other teams running around the ACC. Duke was just very quietly going 9-3 this year. Really remarkable stuff, and a remarkably bad defended Hail Mary from Wake Forest gave them that. Jordan Moore got them the win late in this game, but they were down 17-3 late in the third quarter. They were able to battle back. A fumble on a kickoff by Wake Forest gave them that opening, and they ran in and took it. I think Manny Diaz has done an incredible job this year. He's definitely a guy that I think should be up for that ACC Coach of the Year. Rhett Lashley's going to win it, I have to imagine, but as of right now, I do think Manny Diaz should deserve some respect, and I think when you look at the other schools in North Carolina, there's an opening here. Duke's not necessarily the team that you would equate with dominating North Carolina football, but the way UNC is right now, the way NC State's playing, maybe there's a little bit of an opening for Duke to become that interesting team in North Carolina and maybe make a little bit of a run in the ACC next year. Kansas and Baylor was a very interesting game because going into it, everyone was watching Kansas. Everyone was watching that team that had been such a thorn in the side for so many big-time teams, and then Baylor just took them to the woodshed. They went to absolute work, and Dave Aranda deserves a lot of respect because about halfway through the season, it felt like he was pretty much gone. It felt like it was wrapping up for him over there in Waco after a really incredible start. That did not end up happening, and Sawyer Robertson is a great reason for that. He had 310 passing yards, 4 scores in this one. Bryson Washington just topped 1,000 yards this past weekend. Baldwin and Cameron on the outside are problems. They did an incredible job kind of rebuilding this offense midseason and being able to get the most out of it. Sawyer Robertson is definitely a guy that was a little bit under the radar this year, but definitely had a really incredible year, and it'll be interesting to see what happens with him next. I believe he has another year of eligibility, so if that's the quarterback for Baylor next year, definitely could be a really interesting team. But Kansas' magical run comes to a little bit of an end before that bowl game. Was really an incredible year and really an incredible turnaround from Lance Leipold and the boys. I think it was one of those years where a lot of things went wrong early. That's kind of just the long and short of it. You obviously want a couple of those games back, but there's still a team that I fully expect to be right back into the mix in 2025. I think Lance Leipold just too good of a coach to be held down for that long. NC State was able to top North Carolina, and this was one of the brawls that we saw this past weekend. It got very, very intense, but Hollywood Smothers kind of started that with 25 seconds left when he scored to finish off the fourth quarter that had 32 total points in it. It was absolutely back and forth, absolutely crazy all over the place, and the news here obviously is that ends the Mac Brown era over at UNC, ended on kind of a rough note. Definitely one of those games that you would love to win, send him out on the right note, but it was rough, pretty much start to finish, and even a little bit after the game. It was a rough note, but definitely one of those things where I think UNC handled this pretty terribly. If you saw Mac Brown's comments this past weekend talking about how they wanted him to resign earlier this week, they wanted him to resign on Friday before the game, there were a lot of things that I think they just did not handle this well. This is a very legendary coach. Let him coach out his contract. But at the end of the day, they're in a position where they're now looking for a new hire. For NC State, they're in a position where a lot of things went wrong this year. For a year that felt like it was going to have everything moving in the right direction, possibly get 9-3 season and making a little bit of a run, did not quite happen. You do get to a bowl game, and I think CJ Bailey is going to be a really special player in 2025, so you might just have the quarterback figured out. You got a lot of other stuff to figure out with a lot of those playmakers you brought in likely walking out the door, including Kevin Concepcion. A lot of things to figure out over there in Raleigh. Florida was able to just essentially just take over Florida State in this game, as just about everyone else has this entire year. We had Mike Norvell tossing a flag to the side. We had an argument between the coaches. We had a little bit of a brawl after the game. It was a rivalry. There's no two ways about that. And DJ Lagway continues to make ridiculous plays. His box score was not necessarily jaw-dropping by any means in this game, but he made a couple of plays that were just absolutely ridiculous. In every sense of the word, he just tossed a defensive lineman off him and completed the pass. I don't know how he does it. He's an absolute freak of nature. Cannot wait to see what he can do in 2025. And really remarkable stuff from Florida overall. Those 5 games that we talked about really all year, going into the year and throughout the year, those 5 games at the end of the year that we said are going to be remarkably tough, and we don't know how they're going to be able to win even one of those games. They ended it 4-3. They walked out of it 7-5. So they went 3-2 in those games, beating Ole Miss, beating LSU, beating Florida State. Obviously, the Florida State one's not quite as impressive as the others, but really impressive stuff from Billy Napier and that staff. And Florida State, you have the biggest offseason of just about anyone in the country. It'll be really interesting to see what they do. A lot of different portal moves, a lot of different recruiting moves, a lot of things that have to happen at Florida State over the next 8 or 9 months, and if they don't, then Mike Norvell's clock is officially ticking down there in Tallahassee. And then Oklahoma. I have the scores a little bit flipped here. LSU won 37, Oklahoma 17. Apologies for that, but LSU was able to finish their year on a win in a 7-5 season after 3 straight losses before that final 2 weeks. They were able to beat Vandy, able to beat Oklahoma, kind of salvage this year, make it look just a little bit better than it ended up being. They end 8-4 and make this look clean at the very least. And this LSU team, they seem to be the team that's going to return tons of production next year. This offseason, it feels like a lot of guys are going to come back. At least that's the scuttlebutt that I've heard. Nussmeier could come back. It looks like Emory Jones is leaning that way. The really talented offensive tackle, Mason Taylor, the tight end, looks like he's leaning that way. So could be a huge year for LSU. As much as this year was very upsetting and not what they wanted, I think 2025 is shaping up to be a really interesting one. Oklahoma, they moved into 2025 about halfway through this year, if I'm being totally honest. They are in a bowl game, so we'll get to see maybe Jackson Arnold, maybe someone else. I don't know what's going to happen there, but it'll be a lot of change around Oklahoma this offseason. I think they will have a new quarterback. They obviously will have a new coordinator. They will have a lot of new things around there, and will be a very interesting team to watch in the SEC in 2025. A lot of talent already there in a lot of different places, but I have to assume they're going to be one of the bigger movers when it comes to the portal in and out of that program. So definitely something to watch there, and we'll obviously update you on all of that as it unfolds. But let's take our last break here, and when we come back, we got to talk about my top 15. A lot of movement. I'll be totally honest with you. A lot of different things that I'm fighting myself on even as we speak right about now. The Alabama, Ole Miss, South Carolina conundrum. I fought myself on for about 10 hours, if I'm being totally honest. I finally landed somewhere I feel okay about it. And I'll leave it at that for the time being. We'll talk about my rankings right after this, so stick with us.